Ranking wide receivers in today's NFL is extremely difficult because realistically, there's upwards of 50 wide receivers that you could make a case for to be inside the top 36. So at the end of the day, is that good news because there's tons of depth and people available to draft? Or is it bad news because it means inconsistency at the wide receiver position is going to be super tough to figure out? What's going on, Headliner Nation? Today's video is all about inconsistency at the wide receiver position. Now, I already did a running back video very similar to this, and essentially the breakdown goes like this. I took a look at the top 36 wide receivers based on current ADP. Then I went back through their games last season, and I went through how many times did a wide receiver finish as a wide receiver 1, how many times is a wide receiver 2, is a wide receiver 3, and then outside the top 36 wide receivers. And then a point value is assigned to each of those games. So for every game you finish inside the top 12, it's 1 point. Every game is a wide receiver 2, 2 points. Every game is a wide receiver 3, 3 points. But for every game you finish outside the top 36 wide receivers, you get 5 points. Then we average it out based on how many games were played by that wide receiver last season. The lower the score, the better. And that's your risk factor. And I just want to remind everybody, you can get our draft guide right now at tfhdraftguide.com or using the link in the description down below, $24.99 for some of the best, most in-depth information you're going to find from any fantasy football draft guide available to you. Exclusive content that you're not going to find on the channel or anywhere else in the fantasy football industry. Tons of player profiles, breakdowns, everything you need to win a fantasy championship. Make sure you get yours ordered right now though, because if your league mates are getting theirs, they're already ahead of the game. Now, the running back video that I did on the same information was just over 30 minutes, and my goal is to be around 20 minutes. So we're gonna move quickly through the information. Make sure you're paying attention. Who led the way with the most wide receiver 1 finishes? Well, last year we had a tie with 7 each, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. And that may not seem like a lot, but that's pretty par for the course. Over the last 3 seasons, 24, 23, and 22, there have only been 3 instances where a wide receiver had more than 7 wide receiver 1 games in a season. Back in 2022, it was Justin Jefferson and Stephon Diggs with 9, and in 2023, it was Tyreek Hill with 10. So realistically, on average, you're probably going to get from your top wide receiver 7 wide receiver 1 games in a season. And if they're healthy all season long, which for all of these wide receivers, typically they were, that becomes an issue because not even half of your games, you're going to get wide receiver 1 numbers. So that's the high upside. That's what we want when we're drafting players, obviously. So maybe it's more important for us to zero in on wide receiver 2 finishes because that's where you create safe floors. Wide receiver 1 finishes are great, and we obviously want as many as we can possibly get, especially from the guys that we're drafting very high. But the more wide receiver 2 finishes we have, that means at least we are creating a safe floor where we're not losing weeks because of these guys. So last year leading the way was Drake London. He only had 1 top 12 performance all season long, but towards the end of the year, he definitely played a whole lot better with Michael Penix Jr. Now, Drake London is a guy that people are looking at as a huge breakout candidate that has top 12 potential for the entire season. And that may be true, but maybe we should be a little bit more enthusiastic about the fact that even with subpar quarterback play for a majority of last year, Drake London had 8 wide receiver 2 performances. So while people are all in on Drake London for being a high upside wide receiver 1, I'm personally all in on Drake London being a really solid wide receiver 2 that will absolutely have wide receiver 1 upside. And for me personally, at the wide receiver position, I like a floor a little bit more than a ceiling. Now, for wide receiver 2 finishes, the last one I want to talk about is Terry McLaurin. And a lot of people think Terry McLaurin is going to regress because of his touchdowns this year. I'm not nearly in the same boat. I think Terry McLaurin could have another really good year, especially given where his ADP currently lies. Because while he's never scored as many touchdowns in a season as he did this past year, you also have to keep in mind that there's a little bit of an X factor. He had the best quarterback that he's ever had since he entered the league with Jaden Daniels. And if Jaden Daniels continues moving forward, Terry McLaurin should still see a good amount of touchdowns. 10 plus touchdowns a year is not unrealistic. Wide receiver 3 finishes. Now, this is the area where you can go a little bit back and forth for several different reasons. The biggest reason being, if you finish as a wide receiver 3, you're not winning anybody a week. It's just not going to happen. You probably had single-digit points. But we're starting to see a shift to leagues playing 3 wide receivers, especially in best ball leagues. Now, this is mainly a redraft video. The ADP I'm using is from Underdog and their best ball ADP, but that's just to kind of get a sense of what are owners currently thinking when it comes to drafting. And while best ball might start 3 wide receivers, a lot of leagues still may only start 2. But if you're starting 2 wide receivers, there's a lot of leagues that are also moving to 2 flex spots. So wide receivers being drafted early and utilized more often is becoming a much more popular drafting strategy in today's fantasy football landscape. So if you're in a league that starts 3 wide receivers, this data is definitely useful to you because you're going to want guys that can give you wide receiver 3 performances if you start them as a wide receiver 3. Now, leading the way last year was Malik Neighbors and DJ Moore. DJ Moore is not shocking. Malik Neighbors kind of is, but then when you think about it, the quarterback play was so bad, it makes sense. This is where you can absolutely get killed in a season. Finishes outside the top 36 because you're not showing any ceiling and your floor sucks as well. And this is where guys are really tough to start because even if you have a ton of wide receiver 1 or 2 finishes, the more wide receiver finishes you have outside the top 36, it's going to destroy the consistency in your lineup. Now at the top of the list, Rome Odunze with 12, with Caleb Williams having another year, Ben Johnson being there. Those are all great things. Rome Odunze, to me, could be the Jameson Williams for Detroit last season, where he's going to have some big games and then he's going to disappear in others because, frankly, there's a lot of targets and Caleb Williams still has a lot of growth as well. And even though they did make a lot of changes to the offensive line, they need to gel together. And then Jalen Waddle with 11. That is directly tied to Tua, but he also has a wide receiver 1 in tow as well. When you take a look at some of the guys around him, like Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the wide receiver 1 on his team. You could argue that even if he's getting inconsistent play from the quarterback position, Marvin Harrison Jr. has a better shot to get less games outside the top 36 just because he's the number 1 wide receiver on his team. But that's a question for a few of these guys here that will need to be answered, like a Calvin Ridley, like an Xavier Worthy. DK Metcalf, he's basically by himself now at this point, but will the quarterback situation with Aaron Rodgers get things done? That's where a lot of these questions have to be answered, and you have to go through a step-by-step process to say, okay, a ton of finishes outside the top 36 last year. Why was that? What changes? Are they the number 1 target? Are they getting consistent quarterback play? What's their defense look like? Are they going to be running the ball more often? Will they be throwing it more often? That's going to lead to better finishes. Now, the one thing I can say, every single wide receiver inside the top 36 ADP had at least 1 game last season outside the top 36. So it's going to happen. All right, let's move on to final risk score. And there's a ton of guys in tier 1. So let's go ahead and start there. And tier 1 for me was anybody that finished 2.5 or lower. And we had several guys tie at 2.5. So not shocking to see those guys make it right in here at the very edge. Start with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. They tied with 2.06. Both of these guys are fantastic. If you're worried about Justin Jefferson, I wouldn't be. JJ McCarthy will get the job done. Puka Nacua last season dealt with injuries, and Cooper Kupp was on and off the field. Like, the biggest thing for Puka Nacua in this offense is just staying consistent. Like, keep guys on the field, have consistent playmakers. Puka Nacua should still be the number 1 target, I believe. He'll be the guy that will see the most volume, while Devontae Adams will be a guy that, in my opinion, may have some more inconsistency with big plays, and then other games where he disappears. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a little bit of a lower score this year than what he had last year. Still very viable, but he's the type of guy when you draft him, he's going to give you a little bit more floor than what some other guys will. Maybe his ceiling isn't as great as like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. That's okay. If you're a little bit more risk adverse, then Amon-Ra St. Brown's your guy. A.J. Brown felt way more inconsistent last year than what the numbers show, but 6 games as a wide receiver 1, and realistically, we just need some more wide receiver 2 performances. 6 games where he finished as a wide receiver 3 or lower. We need 2 or 3 of those games to hop up into that wide receiver 2 status. If that happens, it'll feel way better this year. A few guys here at the very edge of tier 1, tier 2. Each of these guys tied at 2.5. There's 4 of them. Terry McLaurin for me. He had 11 of his 16 games inside the top 24 last season, and a lot of people are going to say touchdown regression is going to come, but I understand last year was a career high in touchdowns, but last year was also his best quarterback that he's had so far. And if we really truly believe that Jaden Daniels is as good as he is and will continue to be at least as good as he was last year, if not get a little bit better, Terry McLaurin should end up being just fine. There are more than enough vacated targets for Deebo Samuel to get his and Terry McLaurin to not lose a ton of them. Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter is going to change some things. Volume-wise, we might not see Brian Thomas put together the volume season that we saw from last year, but his big play upside should still be there, especially as teams pay attention to Travis Hunter, Brenton Strange in the run game. Malik Neighbors, all about quarterback play last season. Now 6 games as a wide receiver 3. We need some of those 6 games to bump up to a wide receiver 2. He should get some help at the quarterback position, whether it's Russell Wilson and or Jackson Dart and or Jameis Winston. They might not be great for actually helping the Giants win this year, even though I really like Jackson Dart and what he can do in the future. At least from a fantasy perspective, all these guys should get the ball to Malik Neighbors way more often. Rashee Rice, 4 games last season. He was fantastic. 3 of those games inside the top 24. The one game he wasn't was when he got hurt at the very beginning of the game. All right, diving into tier 2 now. Which one of these guys have the best chance to jump up? Now, T. Higgins had a really good score for the feeling of inconsistency that he just always brings to our lineup. 7 of his 11 games finished inside the top 24. But when you have Jamar Chase as a teammate who's going to see a ton of volume every once in a while, especially 3 times last season, you're going to finish outside the top 36. Drake London has probably the best shot here to go to tier 1. And we talked about it already. 8 games as a wide receiver 2. If he turns 3 of those games into wide receiver 1, and he turns 1 game to top 24 and then 1 game from other to, if we can just move 2 to 3 games per category up, he's going to shoot up next season. Mike Evans, I mean, he was true boom or bust. I mean, when you take a look at him and like a guy like Devontae Smith, both of these guys tied at 2.84 for overall score. 6 games for Mike Evans as a wide receiver 1, 5 games as a wide receiver outside the top 36. That's a lot of inconsistency and could definitely have it once again, especially given how many players are around him. Devontae Smith is always, since he's entered the league, boom or bust. To me, he's a much better best ball pick than he is a redraft pick. If you like to shoot for high upside, Devontae Smith will always be the guy in that scenario. Jackson Smith and Jigba, some of those 5 games outside the top 36 may have been towards the beginning of the season when he wasn't really going. About halfway point when he got going and he was really putting together a fantastic season. He looked like a guy that could give you consistent wide receiver 1 numbers. Wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 numbers, both of those things could happen this year. Jordan Addison, when you have Justin Jefferson as a teammate, like I just talked about with T. Higgins, you're going to have some finishes outside the top 36. The one question about Jordan Addison that I think is going to need to be answered, will he be the number 2 target or will it be TJ Hawkinson? Cortland Sutton has a little bit more competition for targets this year, so really he needs to score some more touchdowns. That would help him out for sure. And then Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams is a guy that you take a look at. Nico Collins scored 2.45. Jameson Williams scored a 3. When you take a look at what these 2 guys did, to me, Jameson Williams is like a diet version of Nico Collins. He's in a better offense, more consistent quarterback play this past year anyway. But he's kind of the guy that's going to have some really big games, and he's going to have a few games that just are not going to help your team. Jameson Williams, though, is being drafted much later than what Nico Collins is being drafted. So I want to hear something interesting in the comments below. Let me know what you're thinking. Who would you rather draft at their ADP? Right now, in a best ball ADP, Nico Collins is going right around pick 10. In a redraft league, he'll probably be in round 2. So let's just say, for instance, round 2 is where you would draft Nico Collins. Jameson Williams is also probably going a little bit higher right now, given this is best ball ADP. In redraft leagues, he'll probably be drafted a little bit later. Jameson Williams, for me, would you rather have him at his ADP, which we'll say between 50 and 55, or would you rather have Nico Collins at his ADP anywhere between like 12 and 15? Let me know your arguments down below. Would be really interested to hear some more about what the nation thinks. Let's take a look at tier 3 players. And there's a couple of guys right off the bat that you really have to think will take the jump up to tier 2 next year. And the first one is CeeDee Lamb with a Dak Prescott that is fully healthy, and George Pickens, who will stretch the field more. You really got to feel like CeeDee Lamb could take the jump to at least tier 2. Tyreek Hill is a guy that could go all the way back to tier 1. He dealt with an injury last year. Tua obviously missed time. If Tua can stay healthy, he's probably back at least close to tier 1. But if Tua's not healthy, then no, absolutely not. That's going to cause a problem. He could be right back down here again. He's very risky. Devontae Adams could end up staying right in this area because I could see him being a guy that has a lot of upside, but also with Puka Nacua, doesn't see enough consistent volume. Ladd McConkey, a lot of his 6 games outside the top 36 became at the beginning of the season. So we'll see if we can take and what he did at the end of last year, move it to 2025. We should see some more consistent play there. Garrett Wilson's directly tied to Justin Fields. The more consistent Justin Fields is, the more consistent Garrett Wilson is. Garrett Wilson will probably have some boom or bust weeks. DJ Moore with a new offensive coordinator, he's going to have a lot of competition for targets. So even if his wide receiver 1 numbers get better, you got to wonder if those finishes as a wide receiver 3 and outside the top 36, if they get a whole lot better as well. George Pickens, probably going to be a little bit more inconsistent as well. You've got CeeDee Lamb. You're going to be big play dependent. And Xavier Worthy, it's kind of the same thing at this point. For Xavier Worthy, you've got a ton of guys around you that are all going to get targets. For Xavier Worthy, with Rashee Rice coming back, you've got Hollywood Brown, who should be healthy all year, Travis Kelce running the football. You're asking for a lot of big play potential that may not always be there. Let's wrap it up with tier 4. Chris Olave, first and foremost, it's all about injuries with him. A lot of concussions, which is really unfortunate. He's going to have to stay on the field. His quarterback situation is not that great heading into 2025, though. Marvin Harrison Jr. really needs to step it up. 9 games outside the top 36 for a first-round pick. Can't have that. Kyler Murray isn't a bad quarterback. Maybe the offense is a little bit bland, but when you watch the videos of Marvin Harrison Jr. last year and you break down the film, he just wasn't that strong at the point of contact, at the point of catch, and he's added some muscle, which may end up helping him. Zay Flowers saw a downward trajectory all season last year. Started the year off really strong. A ton of wide receiver 1-like volume to begin the year with his targets. And then Mark Andrews picked it up, and Zay Flowers faded to the back, and they've added DeAndre Hopkins now. Calvin Ridley's a guy that's going to continue to be very inconsistent. That's just something that's going to happen. That's Calvin Ridley's game. He hasn't been consistent since before the suspension in Atlanta, and really he's a big-time playmaker that's in an offense with a rookie quarterback. Not a ton of competition for targets, but enough competition with the younger guys that I think you're going to see some up and downs from him as well. DK Metcalf and Marvin Harrison Jr. are the 2 in this area that have the best shot to move up because they're the number 1 wide receivers in their offense, and they're the guy without a ton of competition around them. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. does have Trey McBride. I get that. I'm talking more from a wide receiver perspective. They're going to be the wide receiver 1 on their team. For DK Metcalf, we're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets, and I don't know what else Arthur Smith has up his sleeve for this season. I'm not in love with DK Metcalf by any means, but a potential path to volume will be there for him. Juwan Jennings, a little bit of a contract dispute right now, it seems like. Obviously, Ricky Pearsall can end up taking the next step forward. You're going to get Brandon Ayuk back. You still have George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, hopefully healthy. That could all do a little bit of an issue with Juwan Jennings being a guy that could take a step forward. More of like a waiver wire fill-in is what Juwan Jennings will probably be. Rome Odunze has to take a step forward. 12 games outside the top 36 last season. Whether it's Caleb Williams' fault, whether it's offensive scheming, whatever it may be, I think he's going to be a lot like Jameson Williams. Do I think he can take the next step forward? Yes. Do I think he can go higher than like tier 2? No, because I think you're going to see him put some really big games together and then disappear other games. I think what you see him do this year will be similar to what Ben Johnson did with Jameson Williams last year. And Jalen Waddle at the end of the list here in 11 games. These are the only 2 wide receivers being drafted in the top 36 that had double-digit games outside the top 36 last season. 2 is the biggest issue. Why? Obviously, but it comes back to the fact that Tyreek Hill is the number 1. They did trade Jonnu Smith, which could end up being good for Jalen Waddle if Tua stays healthy. I don't really know what they expect that they're going to get from Darren Waller at this point. Devon Achane is going to get work in the passing game as well. Jalen Waddle will be a guy that I think he'll be inconsistent as well, but he's not going to have the upside like a Rome Odunze either. So I think when you end up drafting him, you may not end up loving what you get every week. All right, now on screen, we got the ADP, we got the names, we've got the rookies, and we got what they scored last season. The player that's being drafted the highest, that had the worst score last season, is CeeDee Lamb. Scored 3.13, was in tier 3, but you can make a very good argument that he should be drafted up here anyway, and then that score is going to get a whole lot better as well. Drake London is another name that's kind of fitting inside those tier 1 names. Those tier 1 names are all being drafted extremely high, except for Terry McLaurin. We'll talk about him in a second, but Drake London being drafted right ahead of A.J. Brown. He's another name that makes sense to be drafting in this area because he's another guy that could take a jump into tier 1 as well in terms of consistency. You can say the same thing about Ladd McConkey. You can say the same thing about Tyreek Hill. So a majority of these names here, even T. Higgins, a majority of these names here make sense to be drafted this high. However, what doesn't make sense is Terry McLaurin, with an overall ADP of 32.13, with Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rashee Rice, all these guys being drafted ahead of him. It makes no sense to me. Even if Terry McLaurin loses a few touchdowns, do we really think Jaden Daniels regresses so much that he's not going to be able to keep Terry McLaurin at least at the back end of wide receiver 1 status? Or do you all just love Deebo Samuel? And when I say all, not you all out there watching, but the fantasy football community. Even the worst part about this is, and I've already mentioned it, this is best ball ADP, so clearly for redraft, it's going to look a little bit different. Terry McLaurin should be going much higher in best ball drafts. All of this, I mean, Jordan Addison, obviously, he could have a suspension coming, and so could Rashee Rice, but there's a lot about the ADP with wide receivers this year that just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It just doesn't. What do you see that sticks out the most to you, Headliner Nation? What names are being drafted way too high? What names are being drafted way too low? What players are being drafted over someone else that just doesn't make any sense to you? That's what I want to know here at the end of the video in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on the way this ADP looks, because personally, when I take a look at this ADP, I'm not a fan. I think there's a few things that should change with it. And I think there's some players that are just being completely disrespected. But Headliner Nation, appreciate you tuning into this video. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, turn on the bell notifications, leave a comment down below. Check out all the coming videos. For now, though, I'm going to head out. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.